Okay. So first, I want to thank the organizer for organizing this very nice summit and for the invitation. And so I'm Marc Bernardo. I'm a developer and cryptographer at Nomadic Labs, which is one of the company developing the Tezos blockchain. And today we're going to talk about privacy. And I will first give a quick introduction of where we are at privacy, and then I will talk about our future plans. And so the purpose of this talk is we'll try to link some insight from the business perspective, the engineering perspective, and the cryptography perspective. And I'm trying to mix all of that to give you an idea of what is it, at least for us, to do practical cryptography. So first, before that, I want to say that we are hiring. So we are a small team of now 4 or 5 people, depending on the number of the team. And we are trying to grow. So if you are interested or if you know some people that are interested, please shout at us. So for now, the privacy of Tezos, it's basically it's the sapling protocol. So I will come back on what is the sapling protocol for those who don't know. But basically, it was developed by the Electronic Bank Company to enable the blockchain Zcash. And they did a Rust implementation of it. And what we did is that we took the Rust implementation, made a binding, and then integrate all of that into our own architecture. And the way we expose this to the user is fairly different than for Zcash, because Tezos is a blockchain with a Turing-complete smart contract, so unlike Zcash. And what we did is that we added an opcode to our smart contract language, which is called Michelson, that allow user to do sapling transaction. So this was completed last July, and it's now live on the testnet. You can check it out if you want. I can give you the reference. And it will possibly be activated in February. So on Tezos, what we do is that we propose amendments that are then voted by the community. So if the community votes yes for sapling, then it will be activated and live in production in February. What we did besides integrating the protocol is also we try to increase confidence. So Nomadic Lab has a big background in verification and formal method. And we started several projects. One of them is we want to formally verify using Coq some of our data structure. So we did that for Merkle tree algorithmic. We also are doing a project with INRIA, which is a French research center, of symbolic verification of sapling. So this is a symbolic verification of the pen and paper's proof of sapling. And another project with also another institute, which is the Kestrel Institute in California, which is the verification of the implementation of JubJub, which is an analytic curve used in sapling in R1CS. And those projects, they're good bases for our verification in general, because they give us nice results and increase the confidence in our code. But also we plan to use those projects since this one, the symbolic verification and the verification of R1CS implementation, are both done using automated tool. We should be able to tweak them quite easily to then adapt the proof if we want after that to amend sapling. So the motivation of that, there are two motivations for privacy. There is one which I won't talk about much, even though it's really important, it's personal privacy. This I don't talk about much because it's not what we're most interested in, for the simple reason that if you're interested in personal privacy for transaction, you can use Zcash, it works well. And so I'm not going to talk about that. This presentation, on the other hand, will focus more on traditional financial services. So it can be banks, asset managers, insurance, etc. These are just some of the examples. And these people, basically, what comes out from some discussion we had is that they want to innovate because there are very little automations and there are very long delays. And basically, there are huge legacy infrastructures, which sometimes it results in basically people keeping log an Excel sheet on their computer. And if, let's say, there is a transaction from bank A to bank B, and sometimes one will update the balance and not the other, because there is no atomicity. And then basically they need to solve this by hand. So they have this huge legacy infrastructure, and they want to innovate, but it's quite complicated because those infrastructure, even though they're not really nice from a computer science point of view, they're really nice for the highly regulated framework they're in. And so it's quite difficult for them to innovate because of that. So to start tackling this, we integrated sapling. And so I will quickly say what is sapling on a very high level point of view. So basically it's a protocol that allows to do anonymous transaction or privacy preserving transaction. And it works in the following way. It can handle what we call a shielded pool, in which there are tokens that are invisible to someone exterior. They're only done inside commitments. And you can move the token inside the shielded pool, or you can do what we call mint and burn, which are basically creating or destroying tokens, which is the mechanism sapling uses to communicate with the exterior transparent world. And in this pool, all the users have two sets of keys, spending key and viewing key. And the spending key is more or less the traditional secret key in a blockchain transaction, which means that with it you can spend your money. And the viewing key only allows to see your transaction history, but does not allow you to spend it. So this is typically the kind of key that you would want to give to a regulator if you want to investigate you. And in terms of privacy, what it does is that it hides the amount, which is sometimes called a confidential transaction. And it does more than that because it also breaks the link between the sender and the receiver, and these sometimes are called anonymous transactions. So as I said, we expose it in a different way than Zcash to the user, and we're adding one instruction in our smart contract language. And this instruction is called verify update because it does two things, which are verifying and updating. So it takes some abstract type, so it works as a black box for the user. It doesn't need to know what's happening under those types, state and transaction. So it takes a state, which is basically a blockchain. It takes a transaction. It verifies the validity of the transaction with regard to the state. If the transaction is not valid, then it returns none. Otherwise, it returns the updated state and the balance. Then the smart contract can change its state with the updated state and use the balance to make some computation to accept or not the transaction. So basically, just to be clear and concrete, here we have a blockchain with some normal transaction. We can create a smart contract that has its own balance. It has its own shielded pool. It can communicate with the shielded pool using a mint and burns and do transaction inside the shielded pool. And since this is an opcode of a smart contract language, you can, of course, add more stuff on top. So, for example, here we can add a multi-sig constraint that says that all the transactions have to be approved with by a decent body. And you can do anything you can.
Mark, sorry to interrupt you. I think we may have a question. If you'd still like questions throughout, I can call up the speaker now.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
See if this works here. Okay, maybe not. If someone asked a question, can you share your screen? I thought I saw someone on the moderation panel, but maybe they withdrew their request. Okay, sorry about that, Mark. Go ahead and continue.
Okay. No worries. Okay, so I was saying that basically you can use it inside the smart contract, which is the language being Turing complete. You can do basically what you want. And so we integrated this, and we met with some people that were interested in that because they had regulatory issues, because they needed more privacy in the financial service they were offering. And what came out as a pretty frequent solution was that basically the user would own some tokens that would represent whatever financial title. But the people making this project still wanted some kind of control, so they would make the user submit transaction to an intermediary. This intermediary would have the viewing keys, so it would be able to lift the privacy of the transaction, validate the transaction and censor it if it does not like the transaction. And then there would be like a multi-sig amongst the different intermediaries so that everybody is okay with the transaction. And then once it has passed this step, it goes into the shielded pool and does its stuff. And the main reason they want to do that is to be able to onboard their existing services. So they have a legal department that usually in the traditional world actually sees the transaction and validate them. So they want to take the same department and make them validate blockchain transaction. So they need to do this kind of things. And this will not completely happy because it's really not decentralized and it doesn't change much from what's happening now. Some people are a bit more adventurous in the sense that they want to go a bit toward more decentralization. And I don't know in other countries, but in France at least, it's totally possible that you can legally say, I have this smart contract, but I'm not responsible for what's happening in it. So users can inject their own operations, but they're responsible for their own keys and they're responsible for their own audits, meaning that if the government comes and asks them to see what's happening, they should be able to produce the viewing keys. So we can see some pretty severe limitations on sapling in this kind of use cases, because, well, since it is privacy friendly, it hides a lot of stuff. So it hides the source, the destination, the amounts, all the balances of every individual in the contract, which means that basically there are lots of computation we cannot do. We cannot do classical access control. We cannot do any on-chain logic that requires the viewing key because we cannot put the viewing key on-chain. So basically what happens is that we are in this kind of weird middle ground in which everything is done off-chain and we just keep some things on-chain, but it's not that useful and it does not automate much. So to give a concrete example, we've seen some people that wanted to put shares of a company online, and they did that. Everything was transparent. So they had a big table that logged what everybody owned, and then they wanted to give out the dividend of the share automatically on the blockchain, which would be possible. But if they want to use sapling, they can't do that, obviously, because the individual balance are hidden. So the first conclusion is that sapling does not solve the challenges that we have if we want to handle on-chain completely some financial title. So, okay, I'll go into my second part in which I'll try to explain more what we want. And then the last part will be more cryptography. How do we get there? So first, a disclaimer. I don't pretend to know every use case that we can do with sapling. I'm just, so I'm not exhaustive, but we have an adoption department at Nomadic Labs, and we try to talk as much as possible with them. So we still got some ideas of what can be done. And so as I was explaining in the last part, one big use case is financial title emission and transfer. And what they do is that they tokenize their financial title, put them on chain, and settle off-chain with fiat money. Another big thing, at least in France, and also in Europe, is stablecoins from central bank. So they want to emit some stablecoin on-chain. And so we can see that with these two things, we can put a shielded pool, and they can handle their tokens in the shielded pool. But first, they are quite limited on computation, as explained. And I think the most important thing is that they cannot exchange between two shielded pools. And this will come back on that. And basically, what we want to do is solve that, so that then everything can be done on-chain, and this off-chain fiat settlement is not there anymore. And then we actually can use the automation and win the efficiency, and also have better privacy and security than what is happening now. So this is our purpose. I'll explain more. So to do that, what we want to do is to enhance sapling. So sapling, it's quite rigid, and it does not allow any fine-grained control. And this is completely logic because anytime you want to have strong privacy properties, basically what it will say nothing is leaked besides the fact that the transaction is correct or some kind of thing like that. So basically everything is hidden except what is needed. And what was needed for sapling was Zcash, which does not have a Turing complete language. So obviously they hid pretty much everything. So it's good for them, but not for us. On the other hand, it's still a very robust protocol. It's well tested, it's very efficient, and it still handles for us a lot of heavy machinery that we need anyway, because it handles the fact that you cannot create money, you cannot spend money that is not your own, and all of this privately. So we want to keep all of this heavy work and just enhance it by adding some little proof next to the transaction, basically. And I have a concrete example to be sure that we agree on what I mean. So for example, what we can do, we can trade some privacy for more control on the transaction. And so in sapling, what you do for every input and output, you have attached a CV, which is a commitment to the value. And what we can simply do is we do the normal transaction, which is normal zero-knowledge proof, and we add another proof, which says I know a value such that commit of value is equal to the CV, which is public on the blockchain, and some small property on it, like value is less than 100. So this is what I mean by enhancing sapling, by adding some zero-knowledge proof next to it. So to note on this, first, it ensures a small leak of privacy, and this is inherent because we're proving something more, so we are more precise about what's happening, so there is less privacy. And second, it's not obvious that we can use two proofs that prove two different statements and verify those two proofs and say now I have the conjunction of the two statements. It's not obvious because we do not control the private input inside the proof. But here, since we are talking about commitments, which are public input because they're on the blockchain, we can manage to do that. So we are quite happy with that. And we do not need to redo all the proof of sapling to add one small property. We can just add one small proof. Okay, so another example, maybe a bit more interesting. As I said, there was some problem with whitelisting. So usually, what people like to do is they put a list of authorized persons that can actually send transaction to the contract, and when the transaction comes, the smart contract checks that it's on the list, and only if it is, it then applies the transaction. So this we cannot do with sapling, because if we do that, then the identity of the person doing the transaction leaks, and then we lose basically all privacy properties.
Mark, we have a question in the chat. Maybe I'll just let you read it off.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. So a question from Victor. What kind of commitments are being used here? Does it prevent an attacker from guessing and confirming the value of... Yes, it does. So the commitments, they're the commitment created by the sapling protocol. So they're Peterson commitments. And there is so we put the value and some randomness next to it to avoid this kind of small domain attack. I guess that's what you had in mind, Victor. So yes, it does prevent from guessing and confirming. Okay, thank you for the question. So let me go back. So here what we can do is we can use what I call here a zero-knowledge set, sometimes called an accumulator also. So we'll let the user generate some key pairs, SK and PK. The authority will create a set S of all the authorized public key. And then we can prove a statement that I know a secret key, such that the associated public key is in S with a public key being in the private input. So I don't know, I don't tell who I am, I just say that in the set. And on this, I have two notes. First, it is really nice because actually sapling already does that for a completely different reason. But when you do a sapling transaction, you need to prove that your inputs are in the chain, and you don't want to say which input it is. So they use actually a Merkle tree and a zero-knowledge proof on this Merkle tree to show that. So we can just do that. But there's still a difference for the engineering part, because so our choice and also Zcash choice to handle the Merkle tree was to put everything on chain. Meaning that when you want to verify a Merkle tree proof, you can do that with only the root of the Merkle tree. But you still need the whole Merkle tree to forge the proof, to create the proof. So what you want to do usually is put this Merkle tree on chain, even though it's not needed for the verifier, it's needed for everyone to be able to do their transaction. But here in our case, it is possible that the set of public keys does not change much. So then we can do a light version with only the root of the Merkle tree on chain, and add a zero-knowledge proof if we want to update the set by adding another person in the tree. Then we give a zero-knowledge proof signed by the authority that controls the set to update the root on chain. And then we trust the authority and their clients to work together to solve the data availability issue. And this is interesting because we can see that from the same problem in computer science, we are happy that it exists in sapling because we can then take it from sapling, but we can also make a different engineering decision on that because the use case is different. Okay, and here is a third example of something here we want to do a bit different than Zcash. So as I said, there are viewing keys in Zcash. And this viewing key, the way that works is that from those you can derive some symmetric keys, which then would allow you to decipher some ciphertext, which then gives out the information on the transactions. And so Zcash, they made a choice which makes sense from their point of view, is that you are not forced to put the right ciphertext on chain, meaning that your viewing key might not work if you decide so. And it would allow you to escape corrupt authorities. But in some specific cases, and in our cases, we would like to enforce it sometimes. So for this, we can also add a proof that the ciphertext is correctly encrypted. And this would work well. This means that if you do that with a zero-knowledge set that has a whitelist, basically you can be sure that you can see everything that is happening in the shielded pool. So it's bad for privacy, but it's good for regulation, basically. And here's the last example I wanted to talk about, which is really the preceding one to illustrate like the general way we're thinking and what we want to do, but this one is the one that interests us the most. As I explained, if you have a smart contract, usually what it will do, it will apply a predicate, which I call PSC for smart contract, that takes as input the balance of the transaction, so the outputs minus the inputs, and whatever it wants in the blockchain. Here, env is for environment. And then it authorizes the transaction. So if you want a concrete example, assume I want to make a smart contract that handles the shielded pool whose token are worth 1 TES, for example. The predicate will be that if the transaction creates 10 shielded tokens, I will check in the environment that I received 10 TES at the same time. Or if the transaction destroys 2 tokens, I will then create a transaction to this person to give him back 2 TES. So this is the way the shielded pool can interact with the exterior world. And this, it does not allow us to create any rule of conversion from one asset to another. Why? Because the balance is not sufficient. For example, if you want to enforce that 1 token A is worth 2 token B, You cannot do that with only the balance. What you really need to do is to have a predicate that takes the value in, the value out, and the environment to enforce V in equal to V out, for example. But of course, if we do that, then we lose the privacy of V in and V out. So we want to replace the execution of PSC by a zero-knowledge proof that takes the committed value in, committed value out, the environment, and a predicate. And then it will prove that it knows value in, value out, such that the predicate holds, and of course the commitments are correct. So this is basically what we want to do. Now I'll talk a bit more about zero-knowledge proof, and how technically we plan to go there. So the first thing we need is a universal trusted setup zero-knowledge scheme, or a trustless setup actually, but what we chose was a universal trusted setup. So let me remind quickly what it is. When you want to verify zero-knowledge proof, you will have a verification key and a proving key, and those keys, they come from a setup. And for some zero-knowledge scheme, the setup is so-called trusted because it involves some randomness. And if this randomness is known to the public, then you can forge proofs that prove wrong statements. So this is, so basically we can go around this using multi-party ceremonies, but it's kind of a big burden and we don't want to do that too often. And universal trusted setup, it means that you need to do only one setup and then you can prove all the statements you want, opposed to only trusted setup in which you need to do one setup per different statement you want to prove. So we do need this. Well, first, as you saw, we have lots of use cases in mind. So we want to write multiple statements, so we don't want to do multiple trusted setup. But even if we were ready to do a lot of trusted setup, actually we need an infinity here because the last use case, it requires a statement that we do not know already because it takes as input another predicate. So here we need universal or trustless setup. And the choice we made was Plonk. So why Plonk? First, it's very efficient, both in theory and practice. So basically, to compare to Groth16, which is the one used in sapling, we lose one order of magnitude, but remember that we win universal setup. And compared to another zero-knowledge proving system such as Sonic, which is also universal, so the comparison makes more sense, we win one order of magnitude. So we are a bit slower, but we are willing to pay that price. Second, so it's a universal trusted setup scheme, so it needs one trusted setup. But the good news is that actually it's included in the one of sapling. So we do not need to do it again. Third point, so most of zero-knowledge schemes, they're based on some mathematical base. In our case, it's a pairing. And good news, it's also a pairing for Groth16, which is in sapling. So we can take the same pairing as sapling. And then the cherry on top is that if we take the same pairing, so we do not need to re-implement it and we do not need to maintain two branches of pairing, we also can express well statements about sapling transaction. And the reason for that is that when the ECC did sapling, they choose a pairing such that the field of their circuits would be the base field of their elliptic curve, job. And so everything goes well and you can write very efficient proof. And since we are using the same pairing and making a statement about the same hash function, then we're good. Also, Plonk is, it has received some attention from the community that resulted in a lot of what I call the extension. It's not an official word, of course. We'll talk about quickly now. So one of them, it's Halo 2, which is a very nice trustless setup and recursive friendly proving system. And this can be built reusing some part of Plonk. Also, Plonk can support some custom gates, which is very useful. So basically, it allows you to have lookup tables in your zero-knowledge program for not so expensive. And this is really nice. And we can note that in the already, even if there are no custom get in Groth16, lookup table are used in the job implementation by the ECC. So the fact that we can support lookup table means we know it will be useful, at least to replace the lookup table not done by custom gates, but it should be useful for more than that, obviously. And also there is a Plonk it can be done with a fast Fourier transform, FFT, but we can also replace the FFT with multi-exponentiation so that the parallelization is easier to do and also more efficient. And this we like because we're working in OCaml, which is not so great for parallelization. So the simplest the parallelization is, the happier we are. As a side note, I also wanted to say that anyway, regardless of these three results, and there are other actually, we are glad that we are working on something the community is also working regardless of the results, because then it means that we can, there will probably be standards, etc. That is very helpful for us, because we don't want to do our own thing in our own corner and not talk to anybody. So what we did a proof of concept implementation of Plonk in OCaml. So OCaml is a programming language, functional and with a heavy type system, and what are called modules, which well exist in lots of programming language, but its module structure is quite rich. And this is very nice for us because it can fit very nicely the construction from the crypto papers in general, and in particular for Plonk. So usually in crypto paper, they do one protocol and they'll build a protocol that uses the first one as a subroutine, etc., etc. And we can mimic these structures, which means that then, for example, if we want to implement one of the extension that I mentioned earlier, we could do that in a clean and modular way. And likewise, we could reuse some parts of Plonk for other projects. So we did that in OCaml. For now, it's still at the proof of concept stage. It works, but it hasn't been widely tested, reviewed, benchmarked, etc. And we are also looking parallelly at other implementation in Rust, one from the Dust project and one from the ECC. So we would be quite happy with Plonk, but we also ask ourselves, what about Halo 2? Why is that? Because so it's recursive friendly, which means that then we could accumulate the proof more and more. So if we're going this way meaning taking a sapling transaction and adding some zero-knowledge proof next to it, the number of zero-knowledge proof to verify will grow and grow. At some point, we might have performance issues. So we can already tackle that a bit with Plonk by doing some stuff like, for example, if I have two inputs in a sapling transaction, I have two zero-knowledge proof attached to the inputs. I can design a circuit that verifies two zero-knowledge proof. So I could do that, but it's limited. Like we need to have one circuit with one zero-knowledge proof, one circuit with two, one circuit with three, etc. if we want to do everything in one step. So with Halo 2, thanks to its recursive friendly property, we could do that much more easily. In terms of security assumption, it's a bit more stable in the sense that, so the Plonk we are using with the polynomial commitment we are using uses pairing. And pairing basically, their security is tied to the security of a non-prime finite field, which is something that has evolved in the past few years. So the security assumption is not so stable. Whereas for Halo 2, it's a regular non-pairing friendly elliptic curve, and its security has not changed for decades. And also there are less limitation on the size of the circuits, because in our case with Plonk, we are limited by the trusted setup that puts a bound on the size of the circuits that we can do, and the 2-adicity, so the highest power of 2 we can put as a factor of the order of the field -1, so the order of the multiplicative subgroup. And this is to do FFTs, basically. So we do not need 2-adicity, but we need some kind of structure to do FFTs. And this limits the size of the circuits if we want to have efficient implementation. But if we go towards ILO 2, we change the field in which we write our statements, which means that basically we lose all the work that has been done in the sapling. So we do not like that. And it limits the choice of elliptic curve we can use. Why is that? Because ILO 2 is efficient because it is recursive. And it is recursive because actually you implement two ILO 2, one in one curve and one in another curve, and then you have a cycle of elliptic curve. And this is why it's efficient. And to do that, basically, you need to select some special curves for which you have more control in the order of the subgroup you will find. Okay, so now I'm coming on to my last part. So we have use cases. For this, we want to write statements. We have a zero-knowledge proving system. Now we just need to express the zero-knowledge statement. And so first, some generalities to remind as a reminder. So we are using what we can call general purpose proof system in the sense that I can prove a statement about a circuit that can be any program. And the way to do that usually is that you prove a statement about an intermediate representation, which can be R1CS or arithmetic circuits, etc. And those intermediate representations, well, we can do proof on them, but they suck for programming, basically. This is the price to pay. And so it can be hard to write those statements, and especially in our statements, if you paid attention, we need to express some cryptographic primitives, such as hash functions, encryption, etc. So basically, our goal is to write cryptographic primitives and to compose them with simple logic, because as you saw, our statements are not really complicated. They just ask simple logic and composition. So the first thing we want to do is not throw away the sapling work. As I said, sapling uses ROS16, and their statements are expressed in R1CS. And Plonk, it's a different language, but we can transform those. So we can extract the R1CS representation from the ECC library, and then transform it into a Plonk's representation. And the reason why we can do this easily is because even though they're different, basically they can both do addition and multiplication on the finite field. And as I explained, the finite field is the same because we are using the same pairing. So everything should go well in that regard. Then also I explained that Plonks can do optimization thanks to lookup tables. And those lookup tables are already in use in the ECC code. So we can replace those with custom gates. And then there is also some possibility that we want to use it even more since custom gates are really efficient for Plonk. And then there are lots of optimization done by the ECC and Mina, and you can type that on the internet and have a look at their talk. But I won't go into too much details here. Also, we need to add cryptographic primitives to our toolbox. So we need encryption for the use case with the Fury key when we wanted to prove that an encryption was correct. And also, we might want to get some signatures to treat some batch of transactions. So this is more of a parenthesis because it does not have to do with privacy, but more with efficiencies. And in these areas, there are standardization efforts that we're going to look at and try to stick with them if it suits us. So to conclude, what we want to do is we want to keep sapling, extend it for more fine-grained control. And this is justified by business inputs. We want to keep as much as possible as of the technological stacks to avoid duplicating work, also to avoid maintenance and to avoid the possibilities of bugs. But we still need to change the proving system for that because we do need a universal trusted setup at least. And we also need to develop and ease the writings of intermediary representation. And in our case, we need to take great care about that because it's not only for us, it's also for the user because of the last use case. you see that the zero-knowledge program takes as argument a predicate, an arbitrary predicate, which means that the user will have to use this intermediate representation writing tools. So we need to take extra care in that. And while doing all of this, we try to work on some things that we know other people are working on to avoid basically reinventing the wheel. Okay, so I'm done. If you have any questions, and remember that if you want to join us, you can send a mail at this address, and we'll be happy to interview you. Thank you.
So yeah, anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop in the chat, or go ahead and submit, your audio video requests, and we'll give it a pause here for a second. I can start with a question just quickly. Mark, in terms of beyond what we discussed today, what are the most promising extensions or other areas to explore based on these techniques?
Well, myself, I'm really excited about being able to exchange private token between them. I think it's a very it's a needed steps in order to enable decentralized finance in general. And to do that, well, the nice thing is that it does not require more cryptography, actually. We already know how to do that theoretically. Maybe it needs some more work on the programming language side and also on the efficiency side. So, but to that, I think Clonk is a perfect answer to that. Like really, there is no need for recursion for this kind of things. There is no need, there is only a need for a universal setup and something that can be quite efficient. And that's all, and they're already efficient. So the cryptography is not what's holding us back, actually. I think the engineering side is the more complex one.
Thanks. And do you have any, I think of the use cases you cited, do you have any idea of which might come into production first, or, any proofs of concept already being worked on?
Yeah, it will be the zero knowledge set. The reason for that is because it's the simplest technically, because we can just take the ECC's code for the Merkle tree and translate it into Clonk, and then we're done. It's also something that some people asked us. So it will be the first one.
And I think we have a person who's going to be joining to ask a question. This is the second time I've tried this now. Hopefully it works.
We have a question from Victor.
Go ahead. Why don't you take the question, and I'll work with Fry, who tried to join. I'm not sure why she wasn't able to. Go ahead and take Victor's question.
Okay, sure. Fine. Okay, thanks. So Victor asked, do you think this scheme will also be useful for scalability, or is it more restricted to privacy? It can be used for scalability, but I think if you really want to go for scalability, at some point you need to have recursivity. So it can be used for scalability. For example, you can, if you are able to express a signature scheme in your zero-knowledge language, you can do a circuit that takes 100 signatures and verify them. So this is completely possible, but it's not as clean as if you have a recursive system, and it cannot scale up to the infinite, and it's a bit more burden. So it can be done, but I would go with Halo 2 if I wanted to focus on scalability.
Great. And I think Ray may have asked a question. So if you I think they tried to join, but they were able to share the video. But you can hear this and type your question, and we can answer it, or Mark can answer it for you. Just so you know, everybody who's watching, there's a 12, 15 second delay between when we talk and what they hear, so a little bit of a lag. Yeah, just so everyone.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay, it looks like that question. Yeah, so, oh, Maria, did you have a question? Or are you just saying hi? Oh, never mind. That's the event. That's the event chat. See, there's too many chat windows here. Okay, cool. With that, I think that seems like all the questions we have. I guess I'll wait. I'll pause here 10 to 15 seconds if anyone has any out. Oh, an alibi from.
Oh, okay. The plant. No, no. We do not want to hide which circuit is being used. Because like it. Actually, well, I guess we could want that, but first it's more complicated, and it's fine for us to, like, you're buying you're interacting with a contract that all share of this company. I guess this is fine, like, and they make their own rule, and so there's, well, basically we do not need to hide which token we want to buy. If we might want to do that, if we do, so I guess maybe, as you know, Metastate has been working to extend the shielded pool to handle multiple assets. If we go with that, and then we have multiple assets in one shielded pool, then I guess it makes sense, right? Otherwise, I think it's. Well, I'm not sure how much more complicated it is actually. No.
Cool. And I think, I guess, thanks, Mark. And then I think we had just a few more people trickle in. I'm assuming the main stage talk just ended. So, yeah, I guess maybe I'll pause here for another 15 seconds. And anyone who has any final questions for Mark, please drop them in the chat, or go ahead and ask to be brought up to the audio video, and we'll get those answered. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Feel free and find Mark in the kind of around the event, or feel free to find me as well if you have any questions about the logistics of thing. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the event, and we'll see you guys around at the next talk, I hope. All right. Take care, everyone.